The wind, a relentless sculptor, whispered ancient secrets through the jagged peaks of Blackwood's Gulch. It carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a familiar cold embrace that had become Jack Ryder's only constant companion for 8 long years. Inside his small, weather-beaten cabin, a single oil lamp cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Jack sat at a rickety wooden table, his fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug, the strong, bitter coffee a welcome burn against the morning chill. He felt the weight of the silence, a profound quiet that often swallowed his thoughts whole. This was his chosen exile, a stark landscape mirroring the desolation within him. His face, now lined and perpetually unshaven, told a story of hardship and sorrow. Gray eyes, once sharp and inquisitive, now held a deep, weary ache that never quite faded. He ran a calloused thumb over the rim of the mug, recalling a time when life felt full, vibrant, before the world fractured around him. 8 years. 8 years since the screams, the smoke, the unspeakable loss that had ripped his family from him. 8 years since he buried a piece of his own soul along with them, turning his back on the bustling towns in the detective's badge he once wore with pride. Now only the mountain knew his name. His days unfolded in a predictable rhythm, chopping wood, hunting for a meager meal, mending his worn leather duster. Always the duster, a second skin against the biting cold. Each task demanded a focused mind, a necessary distraction from the gnawing emptiness that often threatened to consume him. He found a grim satisfaction in the physical labor, the ache in his muscles a more tolerable pain than the one in his heart. The cabin was a fortress against memory, a place where the ghosts of his past could not quite reach him, or so he hoped. Sometimes, though, in the dead of night, their faces would appear, vivid and cruel, pulling him back into the nightmare. He would wake, gasping for breath, the taste of ash in his mouth, his hands trembling. Then he would sit by the dying embers of the fire, waiting for the first pale light of dawn to banish the shadows. Today, however, the silence was abruptly shattered. The distant clatter of hooves on rock echoed through the canyon, an alien sound in his secluded world. Jack stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the worn holster at his hip. A flicker of his old detective's caution ignited in his eyes. Few ventured this deep into Blackwood's Gulch, and those who did usually had ill intent. He moved to the small, grimy window, peering through the dusty pane. A lone rider, a speck against the vast canvas of the mountains, was slowly making his way up the winding trail. The horse looked spent, its head low, every step a struggle. The man slumped in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low. Ryder watched, his breath catching in his throat. He felt a sudden, unwelcome jolt, a premonition that this unexpected arrival heralded a disruption far greater than a simple lost traveler. The rider finally reached the small clearing outside Jack's cabin, pulling his horse to a halt. Dust plumed around the animal's hooves before settling back into the earth. The man dismounted stiffly, his movements slow and deliberate, as if every joint protested. He was a stranger, but something about his weathered face, etched with fatigue and sorrow, spoke of a hard journey and an even harder message to deliver. "Jack Ryder," the man rasped, his voice hoarse, barely cutting through the wind's low moan. Jack stepped out onto the porch, the cold air biting at his exposed skin. He kept his expression neutral, his hand still resting on the butt of his revolver. "That's me," he replied, his own voice a low rumble, unused to conversation. The rider ran a gloved hand across his face, pushing his hat back slightly to reveal tired, bloodshot eyes. "Heard you were up here. Took me 3 days to find this place." He paused, looking directly at Jack. "It's about Sheriff Brody." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Thomas Brody, one of the few good men he had ever known, a steadfast friend who had stood by him even after Jack's world crumbled. Brody, with his kind face and his unwavering sense of justice, a beacon in the often dark landscape of the frontier. Jack felt a cold dread begin to coil in his gut. "What about him?" he asked, his voice tighter than he intended. The rider shifted his weight, his gaze falling to the ground before meeting Jack's eyes once more. "He's gone, Ryder. Ambushed in Harmony Creek, 2 nights P. They say it was quick, didn't suffer much." The words were blunt, unvarnished. a raw testament to the brutal realities of their world. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Gone. Brody was gone. The news echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart, stirring up old wounds that had never truly healed. It felt like the last tenuous thread connecting him to his former life had just snapped. He saw Brody's kind smile, heard his reassuring voice, a memory so clear it almost brought him to his knees. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the mournful whine of the wind. Jack blinked, trying to clear the sudden blur in his vision. He refused to let the grief show, burying it deep beneath layers of hardened resolve. They found this on him, the writer continued, breaking the silence, holding out a small, roughly wrapped package. Said he told them if anything happened, to make sure it got to you, said it was important. Jack took the package, his fingers brushing against the coarse brown paper. It felt strangely light, yet carried an immense weight. He nodded curtly to the writer. Thank you for bringing it. The words felt inadequate, swallowed by the enormity of the news. The writer gave another weary nod, then turned and began the slow, painful process of remounting his horse. With a final, sorrowful glance, he turned the animal around and began the slow descent back down the winding trail, leaving Jack alone once more, the small package clutched tightly in his hand. The only sound now was the distant clip-clop of hooves fading into the vast emptiness. Jack walked back into the cabin, the scent of wood smoke and old coffee mixing with the metallic tang of fear and grief that now filled the air. He placed the package gently on the table, staring at it for a long moment as if it held a deadly secret. It was a tangible link to Brody, to the past, to a world he had deliberately abandoned. He traced the rough outline of the twine binding it, his mind racing. Brody was not a man to send trivial messages. Whatever this was, it was important. He knew that much. With a deep, shuddering breath, Jack carefully untied the twine. Inside, nestled among a few folds of cloth, lay Brody's tarnished silver sheriff's badge, slightly bent at one point, just as Jack remembered it. The star, once a symbol of authority and justice, now seemed dull, lifeless. Jack picked it up, feeling the cool metal against his palm. He ran his thumb over the etched words sheriff, a wave of profound sorrow washing over him. Brody had worn this every day for decades. It was more than just a badge. It was a part of the man. Beneath the badge, wrapped in a small piece of oilskin, was a small, crudely carved wooden box, no bigger than Jack's palm. It was the same box Brody always kept on his desk, filled with worn brass cartridges. Jack remembered it well. He opened the lid, revealing the familiar cartridges, but something felt different. He turned the box over in his hand, feeling for a seam, a loose panel. Brody was always meticulous, even with his small habits. A tiny, almost invisible latch on the underside gave way with a soft click. The bottom of the box swung open, revealing a hidden compartment, barely large enough for a folded piece of paper. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, Brody's true message. He carefully extracted the paper, his fingers brushing against the dry, brittle edges. It was a single sheet, folded several times, written in Brody's distinctive, sprawling hand. The ink was faded, as if written in haste or under duress. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the familiar script. The first words were a punch to the gut. Jack, if you're reading this, I'm gone. A lump formed in Jack's throat. Brody knew. He had known his time was short. The realization sent a fresh wave of grief through him, but also a fierce admiration for his friend's foresight. Brody was always one step ahead, even of his own demise. Jack read on, his brow furrowing with each word. Brody wrote of a woman, a giantess named Sarah Vance, who lived out on a homestead near Willow Creek. He spoke of dangerous documents, a secret that could unravel powerful men, and of killers who would stop at nothing to get their hands on them. Brody had been trying to protect her, but they were closing in. He wrote that he had stalled them for as long as he could, but his time was running out. She needs you, Jack. The letter continued, the urgency practically leaping off the page. She's alone, she trusts no one. But she needs protecting, and those documents, they are more dangerous than you can imagine. Promise me, Jack. Protect her. Protect the secret. Jack reread the words, his mind reeling. A giantess? The image conjured in his mind was almost fantastical, something out of a child's storybook. Brody was a man of facts, not flights of fancy, yet the desperation in his friend's writing was undeniable. The mention of dangerous secrets and powerful men sent a shiver down Jack's spine. It felt like the shadows of his own past were beginning to stir, the same kind of greed and ruthlessness that had destroyed his family. Brody's last plea, his final request, was clear. Protect her. He could feel the weight of that promise, a burden laid upon him by a dying man. It was a promise Jack knew he could not refuse, not to Brody. Brody had been the one person who never judged him, who saw past the haunted exterior to the man he once was. He had offered comfort when Jack had none, a steady presence in a world that had become chaos. Now Brody's voice, even from beyond the grave, commanded him to act. The thought of venturing back into the world, back into the fray, sent a cold wave of apprehension through him. He had sought refuge in solitude for a reason, to escape the very dangers Brody was now asking him to confront. But the moral compass within him, though battered and worn, still pointed true. He looked around his cabin, his sanctuary, the place he had built brick by lonely brick. He had painstakingly crafted this isolation, a shield against further pain. Now it felt like a cage, a place he was being forced to abandon. The wind howled outside, a mournful dirge as if lamenting his departure. He felt a deep, aching weariness. He was tired of fighting, tired of loss. Yet Brody's words echoed in his mind, "She needs you, Jack." The image of a colossal woman, a giantess, kept returning to him, adding a bizarre, almost surreal layer to the gravity of the task. He shook his head, trying to clear the fantastical vision. Whatever Brody meant, it was real enough to cost him his life. Jack knew he had to honor his friend's final wish. He could not turn his back on Brody, not now, not ever. The world had taken enough from him, but it would not take his sense of duty, not completely. He pushed away from the table, the old wood groaning in protest. There was no time for contemplation, no time for grief, not yet. He moved with a renewed, grim purpose, his movements fluid and practiced. He began to pack his meager belongings, each item a tool for survival, a piece of his former life. He checked his old Colt revolvers, spinning the chambers, the metallic click of familiar comfort. He pulled his worn leather duster from its peg, the heavy fabric settling on his shoulders like a second skin, a cloak against the elements and the world's cruelties. He filled his saddlebags with dried meat, a tin of coffee, a few rounds of ammunition, the familiar creak of saddle leather, the scent of horse and dust, the feel of cold metal and rough fabric. These were the sensations of a life he had sworn to leave behind. He ran a hand over the map hanging on the wall, tracing the rough routes from Blackwood's Gulch to Harmony Creek, and then southwest towards Willow Creek and the Vance homestead. It was a long journey, a dangerous one, and he knew it would drag him back into the very heart of the darkness he had so desperately tried to escape. His mind replayed Brody's words, especially the part about the giantess and her dangerous secret. The sheer strangeness of it, coupled with Brody's absolute conviction, gnawed at him. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a cold certainty that this mission would be unlike anything he had ever faced. But Brody had trusted him, and that trust, even in death, was a sacred bond. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Brody's kind, steadfast face one last time. He had failed to protect his own family. He would not fail Brody. Haunted by Brody's last plea and the cryptic mention of a giantess, Jack reluctantly packed his gear, knowing his painful past was about to collide with an unknown future. The wind bit at Jack Ryder's face as he urged his weary horse down the treacherous mountain pass, leaving Blackwood's Gulch behind. Every rock and gnarled pine seemed to claw at his retreating form, pulling him back into the solitude he had carved out of grief. The air grew thicker with each descending foot, losing the crisp, isolating bite of the peaks. He inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke replacing the sterile cold of his cabin. A dull ache settled behind his ribs, a physical manifestation of the world he was forced to re-enter. He gripped the reins tighter, the worn leather familiar beneath his fingers. For 8 years, this path had only led upwards, away from people, away from the echoes of a life shattered. Now it twisted downwards, dragging him towards the noise and the pain he had so desperately tried to outrun. The rough ground beneath his horse's hooves mirrored the jagged landscape of his memory. Each step jarred loose another painful fragment. He saw Emma's smile, bright as the morning sun spilling through their kitchen window, as she handed him a steaming cup of coffee. Her laughter, light and free, still rang in his ears, a phantom melody in the quiet wilderness. Then came the chilling counterpoint, the frantic, terrified scream of his young son, Thomas, abruptly cut short. Jack's knuckles whitened around the reins, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The smell of gun smoke, the metallic tang of blood, the horror etched into Emma's final pleading gaze. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, the world blurring into a crimson haze. This was why he had fled, why he had buried himself alive in the mountains. This was the raw, unyielding core of his being, a wound that refused to heal. A stark image flashed. Sheriff Brody's kind, weathered face, speaking of duty, of justice. Brody's badge, now tucked securely inside Jack's duster, pressed against his chest like a brand. It was a constant reminder of the promise, the final desperate plea of a dying friend. Brody had believed in him, even after everything. Brody had seen the man Jack used to be, the man he had buried along with his family. The thought brought a strange mixture of resentment and fierce, unyielding loyalty. He hated this journey, hated the resurgence of pain, but he could not abandon Brody's last request. He could not. Hours later, the narrow trail widened, eventually opening onto a dusty road. The distant silhouette of Harmony Creek appeared, a cluster of wooden buildings clinging to the vast, indifferent landscape. The sight was a jolt, a sudden immersion into the world he had forsaken. He hadn't set foot in Harmony Creek in almost a decade. 8 years. It felt like a lifetime. The town looked exactly as he remembered it, a single main street, a scattering of storefronts, the saloon's swing doors perpetually ajar. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. He was different. The town was a ghost of a happier past. He dismounted at the edge of town, tying his horse to a hitching post outside the general store. The air here was heavy with the smell of horses, stale beer, and the faint, sweet scent of newly sawn timber. A piano tune, tinny and off-key, drifted from the saloon. He pulled his hat lower, casting a shadow over his eyes, feeling the weight of unspoken glances from the few townsfolk on the street. Did they recognize him? The weathered face, the perpetually unshaven jaw, the lean frame that spoke of hardship and solitude. He moved with a practiced anonymity, his worn leather duster blending with the dust and shadows. Inside the general store, the familiar scent of cured tobacco, coffee beans, and dry goods filled his nostrils. Old Man Hemlock, the proprietor, peered over his spectacles, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Jack. Recognition flickered, quickly replaced by a cautious, almost fearful expression. Jack bought a small sack of coffee and some jerky, his voice a low rumble. He did not engage in small talk. He just listened. Outside, he found a bench near the livery, away from direct attention, but close enough to catch snippets of conversation. He chewed on the tough jerky, the bland taste a stark contrast to the bitterness in his mouth. He watched the comings and goings, the town's rhythm, a stark reminder of the life he once led. A group of men gathered near the saloon entrance, their voices hushed, their expressions grim. Jack instinctively moved closer, feigning interest in his horse. "Still can't believe it. Can you, Frank?" one man muttered, his voice coarse. "Old Brody. Never thought I'd see the day." "A damn shame," another replied, spitting tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "Right there in his office, they say. Bold as brass." Jack's jaw tightened. Brody's death. This was what he needed to hear. He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, but his ears strained, catching every word. "Sheriff was a good man," the first man continued, shaking his head. "Always fair. Always kept the peace. Peace ain't worth much when the kind of trouble Brody was chasing comes calling," Frank observed, his voice heavy with resignation. "He was poking around places he shouldn't have been. That's what I heard. That Vance girl, she brings trouble." Jack's head tilted almost imperceptibly. The Vance girl. The cryptic message from Brody echoed in his mind. protect the giantess. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Aye, the Vance girl," the first man scoffed, a hint of fear mixed with disdain in his tone. "Always been strange, that one. And now this. Folks say Brody was out at her place just a few days before. You know?" He trailed off, glancing around nervously. "She's a sight, all right," Frank chuckled without humor. "Never seen a woman built like her, like a whole oak tree walking around." He paused, then his voice dropped lower. "And her father, Lord rest his soul, he kept secrets. Dangerous secrets, some say." Brody knew it. Jack's heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't just gossip, it was confirmation. Brody's investigation, the giantess, the dangerous secret. It was all interconnected. He saw the genuine fear in the men's eyes. Fear not just of Brody's death, but of what it represented, what it hinted at. The fear of something far larger and darker than a simple frontier dispute. He spent the rest of the afternoon moving between the general store, the blacksmith, and the saloon. He bought a drink at the saloon, sitting in a dark corner, nursing a lukewarm beer. The clatter of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the smell of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies. It all assaulted his senses. He felt like an exposed nerve, yet he forced himself to listen, to absorb every scrap of information. The whispers persisted, weaving a tapestry of unease around the Vance name. People spoke of Sarah Vance as an anomaly, her immense stature a subject of both awe and mild terror. They described her as private, reclusive, just like her father had been. But always the undercurrent was the same: trouble. She was a magnet for it, or perhaps she simply was the trouble. They spoke of strangers in town, men who didn't look like they belonged, asking too many questions about the Vance homestead, asking about Brody's movements. One grizzled prospector, his face lined like an old map, muttered into his beer, "It ain't natural, a woman that size. And her daddy's papers. He dug up things best left buried. Brody found that out, didn't he? They got him for it." He took a long swig, his eyes wide with an unspoken terror. Jack absorbed it all, piece by agonizing piece. Brody had been investigating something tied to Sarah Vance's father. Something in those papers. And Brody had paid the ultimate price for it. The pieces clicked into place, forming a disturbing picture. The giantess, the dangerous secret, the assassins. It was all real, and it was closing in. He finished his beer, the taste metallic and flat on his tongue. The weight of his possess, the haunting memory of his lost family, pressed down on him. This was exactly the kind of darkness he had fled. But Brody's face, his final plea, burned in Jack's mind. He had to see this through. He was a detective, even if he no longer wore the badge. He had a duty, a promise. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, Jack made his way out of Harmony Creek. He felt the watchful eyes of the town on his back, a silent farewell to a man they barely remembered, a ghost returning to a world that didn't want him. He mounted his horse, the creak of the saddle, a lonely sound in the fading light. The road stretched ahead, winding towards the Vance homestead, towards the unknown. He rode for a short while, the sounds of the town quickly receding behind him, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of dry grass. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant forest. He kept his gaze ahead, his senses on high alert, the detective instincts he thought long dead stirring back to life. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. Then he saw them. 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the dying light, emerged from a copse of trees ahead. They were not townsfolk. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated. Their horses moved with a silent, predatory grace. They wore long coats, their faces obscured by the brims of their hats. One of them, a man with a distinctive scar that caught the last glint of the sun, reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping the road. Jack knew this look. It was the look of a hunter. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. These were the men, the ones the prospector had spoken of, the ones who had killed Brody. He pulled his horse to the side of the road, pretending to adjust a strap, his hand hovering near the grip of his old revolver. The riders passed him slowly, their eyes sharp, calculating. missing nothing. A cold dread washed over Jack. They were not just passing through. They were waiting. They were searching. As the last rider faded into the twilight, Jack knew with chilling certainty that the dangerous secret was not just a rumor. It was a clear and present threat. The hunt had begun, and he was now squarely in its path. A sharp, metallic twang ripped through the stillness of the afternoon air, a sound instantly followed by the vicious whistle of lead. Jack Ryder did not think. He simply reacted. His body slammed into the dusty trail with a practiced thud, the impact jarring his teeth. 8 years of quiet solitude had blurred the edges of many old instincts, yet the raw alarm that screamed through his veins remained as sharp as a newly honed blade. He rolled, a whisper of motion, coming to rest behind the gnarled trunk of a mesquite tree. The sudden, violent crack of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, a deafening drumbeat in the sudden silence that followed. Dust exploded in the exact spot where he had been only a heartbeat before, a phantom of his recent presence. They had found him. His fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his gut, sought out the familiar cold steel of his revolvers. Two Colt 45s, old friends he had believed he buried alongside his former life, slid smoothly from their worn leather holsters. The solid weight of the metal felt right, a forgotten anchor in the swirling chaos that had just erupted around him. He pressed his body low against the parched earth, every nerve straining to listen. He heard the faint scrape of boots on rock, the rustle of dry brush. 3 distinct positions, he calculated. Maybe 4 men. They moved with a chilling coordination, not the haphazard aggression of common road agents. This bore the mark of Silas Blackwood's ruthlessness, or perhaps someone equally cold and efficient. A memory flashed behind his eyes. Sheriff Brody's kind, weathered face, etched with pain in his final moments. "Protect her, Jack," Brody had whispered, his breath ragged. The giantess. Those words, heavy with unspoken meaning, fueled a cold, unyielding resolve, pushing back the rising wave of dread. Another shot tore through the air, closer this time, splintering dry wood from the mesquite branch just inches above his head. He peered through a narrow gap in the branches, his eyes, now accustomed to the harsh glare, scanning the rocky slopes with intense focus. A flicker of movement, then a distinct glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel, high on the ridge. Jack squeezed off 2 quick shots, the roar of the 45s deafening in the sudden, ringing silence that followed. A raw cry of pain answered him, then a dark shape tumbled down a small incline, coming to an abrupt stop. One down. His senses sharpened further, the vast world narrowing to only the immediate, desperate threat. He was a hunter again, forced back into the unforgiving skin he had tried to shed so long ago. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth. The dry air now carried the acrid, metallic scent of gunpowder, mingling with the earthy smell of the desert. His mouth tasted of dust and adrenaline, a familiar and bitter cocktail he remembered all too well from a different lifetime. He moved, a silent shadow against the ochre rock face, using every dip and rise of the uneven terrain for cover. He saw their tactic. The men were spreading out, attempting to flank him, to box him in. They underestimated him, he knew. They saw only a lone rider, a ghost from the mountains perhaps. They did not know this ghost carried a past that clawed at him, a past that had meticulously taught him how to survive the darkest corners of the world. He spotted the second man, silhouetted for just a breath against the pale sky as he crested a jagged ridge. Jack fired, the bullet whistling true. The figure staggered, a puppet with severed strings, then fell, disappearing from view behind the rocky outcrop. That made 2. A cold, hard certainty settled over him like a stone. These were not men seeking a quick score. They were hunting, and he was nothing more than an obstacle in their path. His thoughts drifted to Sarah Vance, the woman he had sworn to protect, a woman he had not even met. If they were this brutal, this relentless with him, what would they do to her? The chilling question ignited a fierce, protective fire deep in his gut, a surprising intensity that burned away the last vestiges of doubt. A third man, perhaps bolder or simply more desperate, charged from the left, firing a shotgun wildly as he came. Pellets ripped through the air with an angry hiss, tearing leaves from a nearby creosote bush and scattering them like broken promises. Jack dropped to one knee, a swift, fluid motion, steadying his aim with the practiced ease of an old hand, then fired. The man grunted, a strangled sound, his charge faltering as he stumbled forward before collapsing into a crumpled heap on the ground. 3. Jack's breath hitched, a faint tremor running through his hands. This was a brutal dance with death he had sworn off years ago. Yet the macabre music played on, pulling him deeper into its rhythm. He waited, holding his breath, listening for any telltale sign of a fourth attacker. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of pine and something else, something metallic and unsettling. Blood. His own pulse hammered a frantic rhythm in his ears. He was alive for now. He knew better than to assume the fight was truly over. These men operated with a grim, chilling efficiency he recognized from his days tracking far more dangerous prey. Brody's words echoed again, a mournful whisper carried on the desert wind. Dangerous secret. Sarah, he realized with a fresh pang of fear, was clearly at the very heart of it. Suddenly, a searing pain bloomed in his left shoulder, blossoming outwards with agonizing swiftness. He gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound, stumbling back against the rough rock face. A bullet had grazed him, ripping a jagged tear through his worn duster and tearing into his skin beneath. He felt the warm, sticky flow of blood almost immediately, a grim confirmation. The fourth man. He swore under his breath, a low, guttural sound, his eyes darting desperately to the ridge above him. The shooter remained hidden, a phantom, but the wispy curl of smoke from his rifle barrel gave him away for one fleeting, crucial second. Jack grit his teeth against the raw pain, the old wound from his past flaring with a phantom ache in conjunction with the new one. He raised his revolver, taking careful aim, his vision momentarily blurred by the rush of pain and adrenaline. He fired, not at the visible smoke, but at the barely perceptible shadow just beyond it, relying on instinct and a lifetime of reading the land. A choked cry, followed by the distinct sound of a rifle clattering against rock, then the dull thud of a body hitting the ground. Silence descended once more, heavy and absolute, broken only by the rasp of his own ragged breath. He leaned heavily against the cool rock, his breathing ragged, a sharp stitch in his side. The pain in his shoulder was a searing, constant reminder of how incredibly close he had come to joining the fallen. He pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the warmth of his own blood seeping slowly through his shirt. It was not deep, he assessed, a mere graze, but it stung like fire, a burning brand on his skin. His head cleared, the haze of battle slowly dissipating, replaced by grim clarity. He looked at the fallen men, 3 visible, 1 hidden among the rocks. Their ruthlessness was undeniable. They had come for blood, and they would not have stopped until their mission was complete. This had not been a simple robbery. This was an execution squad. He pushed himself away from the rock, moving with a grim determination despite the throbbing in his shoulder. He had to know who they were, who had sent them on this deadly errand. He approached the closest fallen man first, his revolver still drawn and ready, every sense alert. The man wore plain, dark clothing, devoid of any distinguishing marks or symbols. Jack went through his pockets with practiced, efficient ease, his fingers searching quickly. He found a few coins, a half-empty tobacco pouch, and then a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it with care. It was a crude map, hand-drawn, detailing a series of winding trails and familiar landmarks. And clearly marked at the very center, circled in angry red ink, was a single chilling name: Vance Homestead. His gut twisted, a cold knot forming deep within him. The confirmation struck him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. They weren't just after him. They were headed directly for Sarah, their true target. This ambush had been nothing more than a delay, a deliberate maneuver to clear their path. Brody's warning had been dire, but the terrifying reality was far more immediate than he had dared to imagine. Sarah Vance was in mortal danger, alone and unaware, and these men were just the vanguard of a much larger, far more sinister threat. The thought of her vulnerability, of her trusting nature exposed to such brutality, propelled him forward with a desperate new energy. The pain in his shoulder was forgotten, replaced by a surge of overwhelming, urgent purpose. He had to get to her. Now, the dust of the trail still clung to Jack's worn leather duster, a fine, gritty reminder of the ambush. The bullet graze on his side throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, each jolt of the horse a fresh stab of discomfort. He pushed it aside, his senses tuned to the subtle shifts in the wind and the faint whispers of the land. The map, retrieved from the pocket of a fallen attacker, was crumpled but clear, marking the path to the Vance homestead. He had ridden for hours since that brutal encounter. The sun, a relentless hammer in the sky, driving deeper into the isolated valleys. The air grew heavier here, warmer, carrying the scent of rich earth and distant livestock, a stark contrast to the thin, sharp cold of Blackwood's Gulch. He was leaving the world of craggy peaks and silent pines, entering a different kind of wilderness, one shaped by human hands but still fiercely untamed. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Blackwood's men, any dust plume that might betray their presence. The memory of their ruthless efficiency was a cold knot in his stomach. They were shadows, striking with precision, and they would not have given up the chase so easily. Jack knew they were likely still out there, circling like vultures, waiting for their moment. His mind replayed Brody's words, a broken record in his head. Protect her, Jack, the giantess. The very idea had seemed like a fever dream, the ramblings of a dying man. Now, with the weight of that promise pressing down, and the tangible threat of Blackwood's killers closing in, the surreal quality of the task only deepened. He had spent 8 years trying to escape the madness of his past, the haunting images of his family's final moments. But this new reality was pulling him back into a chaos he never imagined. He felt like a marionette dancing to the string of a dead friend's last wish, completely unprepared for the bizarre performance that awaited him. The trail opened into a wide, fertile valley, an unexpected splash of green in the otherwise rugged landscape. Fields stretched out on either side, golden wheat swaying gently in the breeze, interspersed with patches of darker, richer soil. In the distance, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills in a dense, dark forest, stood the Vance homestead. It looked unassuming from this far, a collection of sturdy wooden buildings, a main house, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, all weathered by years of sun and wind. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a domestic sight that felt utterly out of place amidst the danger. Jack reined in his horse, a quiet, dusty presence beneath him. He dismounted, careful to stay hidden behind a cluster of gnarled oaks at the edge of the valley. His hand instinctively went to the familiar grip of his revolver, the cold steel a reassuring weight against his palm. He pulled out his field glasses, the lenses blurring slightly with the dust that coated everything. He swept the area slowly, methodically, his gaze lingering on every shadow, every movement. No signs of Blackwood's men yet, but that meant nothing. They were cunning, patient predators. He studied the homestead itself. Fences, sturdy but not fortified, marked the perimeter. A well-used path led from the main house to the barn, a few chickens scratched in the dirt near a coop. Life here seemed to continue, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. This peaceful scene felt like a fragile illusion, ready to shatter at any moment. He could almost hear the distant clatter of a bucket, the lowing of cattle, sounds of honest toil that amplified the sense of impending tragedy. The quiet hum of the valley was broken only by the wind rustling through the wheat and the anxious beat of his own heart. He shifted his weight, his eyes continuing their careful sweep. And then he saw her. At first, she was just a distant figure in the fields beyond the barn, moving with a rhythm that seemed too deliberate, too powerful for a solitary farmer. He lowered the field glasses, blinked, and then raised them again, focusing with a sudden, desperate intensity. The world through the lenses sharpened, and his breath hitched in his throat. It was her. It had to be. The woman was working a patch of land, perhaps clearing stones or tilling the earth, her back to him. But even from this distance, through the magnifying power of the glass, her scale was undeniable. She was immense, a towering presence that dwarfed the plow she leaned against, making the sturdy farm implement look like a child's toy. The very ground seemed to recede around her, accentuating her colossal form. Jack had seen large men in his life, giants of the plains, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for this. A tremor went through him, a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock that bypassed his exhaustion and his pain. Brody's words, once cryptic and almost comical, now crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. A giantess. He had imagined a tall woman, perhaps 6 feet or even a little more, an imposing figure certainly, but one still within the realm of human expectation. This woman was a force of nature, a living monument, a creature from legend, suddenly manifest in the mundane reality of a sun-drenched field. He lowered the field glasses again, his hands shaking slightly. He needed to see it with his own eyes, unmagnified, to truly believe it. He squinted, the figure still visible, still impossibly tall, a dark silhouette against the bright field. The sense of unreality was overwhelming. This was not just a tall woman. This was something entirely different, something that defied the natural order he had always known. His mind struggled to process the visual information, trying to reconcile it with everything he understood about the world. It was like seeing a mountain suddenly walk, or a tree decide to take flight. He raised the field glasses once more, compelled by a morbid fascination. She moved with a surprising grace for her size, each movement fluid and powerful. Her long auburn hair, braided down her back, swung gently with her motions. Her frame was not merely large, but muscular, strong, suggesting years of physical labor. She wore simple, practical clothing, a plain dress of some dark fabric, sturdy boots on her feet. Even the boots looked enormous, like miniature boats. The sunlight caught the gleam of sweat on her arms as she worked, a testament to her exertion. Jack felt a laugh bubble up, dry and humorless, catching in his throat. This was the woman he was supposed to protect. This was the vulnerable person Brody had entrusted to him. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. How could he protect someone who could probably snap him in half with a single hand? His skills, his instincts, his training, all felt utterly inadequate in the face of this unbelievable reality. He was a detective, a man who dealt in shadows and whispers, in the delicate balance of evidence and deduction. This situation was screaming, impossible, and utterly baffling. His own problems, the deep, gnawing grief that had consumed him for 8 years, felt suddenly small, almost trivial in the face of this new gigantic problem. He had come here drawn by a deathbed promise, seeking some kind of redemption, some way to quiet the ghost that haunted him. Instead, he had found himself face to face with a living enigma, a challenge that seemed designed to mock his very existence. He felt a profound weariness settle over him, deeper than any physical fatigue. The world, it seemed, was determined to throw him curveballs he couldn't even comprehend, much less catch. He thought of Brody, his kind, steadfast friend. Had Brody known? Had he truly understood the immense, literal scale of the woman he was asking Jack to protect? Or was Brody, in his final moments, just clinging to a desperate hope, sending Jack on a fool's errand that would lead to certain disaster? A bitter taste filled Jack's mouth. This wasn't just dangerous. It was insane. He watched her for a long time, trying to make sense of the sight. The farm animals, cows and horses in a distant pasture, looked like toys beside her, their scale distorted by her presence. A small dog, no bigger than his fist, trotted obediently at her heels, a comical companion to such a monumental figure. She stooped, her entire body bending, to pick something from the ground, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He could hear the faint sounds of her work now, the rhythmic thud of a tool hitting the earth, a soft exhalation of effort. Every sound was deeper, more resonant, carrying further across the fields. His mind raced, grappling with the practicalities. How did she fit in a normal house? What kind of horse could carry her? How could they hide her from Blackwood's men, who were clearly tracking her down for some dangerous secret? She was a beacon, a landmark, impossible to conceal. The thought was both terrifying and darkly amusing. He felt a desperate urge to run, to turn his horse and flee back to the solitude of his mountain, where the only giants were the silent peaks. But Brody's badge, tucked into his pocket, felt heavy, a constant reminder of his oath. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. His eyes narrowed, observing her carefully. She worked with an intense focus, her movements precise despite their power. There was a dignity in her labor, a quiet strength that emanated from her even at this distance. She was not just big, she was purposeful, formidable. He could see the lean muscle beneath her clothing, the effortless way she handled tools that would strain an ordinary man. His detective's mind, despite the shock, began to churn. Her size was a weakness for concealment, yes, but it was also an undeniable strength. Could she defend herself? Could she defend him? The thought was jarring, turning the conventional roles of protector and protected on their head. He, the hardened, world-weary detective, was supposed to shield this colossal woman from danger. The irony was almost unbearable. He had faced down outlaws, murderers, and corrupt officials, but never before had his assignment been so profoundly, physically overwhelming. A cloud passed overhead, casting a momentary shadow across the valley. It moved quickly, and then the sun was back, brighter than before. He realized he had been holding his breath. The silence of his observation was broken only by the distant sounds of the farm and the whisper of the wind. He was acutely aware of his own smallness, hidden amongst the trees, a tiny speck observing a magnificent, improbable landscape. He had expected danger, deceit, and perhaps even a femme fatale. He had steeled himself for a return to the brutal realities of the world he had abandoned. But he had not expected this. This was not the world he knew, not the world he had ever imagined. It was a world turned upside down, a challenge that went beyond the physical, beyond the tactical, straight into the realm of the unbelievable. He tightened his grip on the field glasses, his knuckles white. The ache in his side flared, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of his own vulnerability. He was tired, wounded, and staring at a woman who could probably uproot one of these ancient oaks with her bare hands. The weight of his promise and the sheer audacity of Brody's dying request pressed down on him with crushing force. He felt a profound sense of isolation, alone in this valley, facing a task that felt utterly impossible. Just then, as if sensing his prolonged scrutiny, the giantess paused her work. Slowly, deliberately, she straightened up, her immense form rising against the golden wheat fields. Jack watched, mesmerized, as she turned her head. Her gaze, even from this considerable distance, felt piercing, as if she could see right through the dense foliage that concealed him. Her long shadow, stretched by the late afternoon sun, reached out across the field, growing longer and longer until it seemed to engulf the very spot where he stood. And then her eyes, striking green even from this distance, found his. Jack stood frozen, the field glasses still pressed to his eyes, his breath caught in his chest. His mind went blank, utterly devoid of thought, leaving him momentarily speechless and utterly bewildered. The dust of the trail still clung to Jack's worn leather duster, a fine, gritty reminder of the ambush. The bullet graze on his side throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, each jolt of the horse a fresh stab of discomfort. He pushed it aside, his senses tuned to the subtle shifts in the wind and the faint whispers of the land. The map, retrieved from the pocket of a fallen attacker, was crumpled but clear, marking the path to the Vance homestead. He had ridden for hours since that brutal encounter, the sun a relentless hammer in the sky, driving deeper into the isolated valleys. The air grew heavier here, warmer, carrying the scent of rich earth and distant livestock, a stark contrast to the thin, sharp cold of Blackwood's Gulch. He was leaving the world of craggy peaks and silent pines, entering a different kind of wilderness, one shaped by human hands but still fiercely untamed. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Blackwood's men, any dust plume that might betray their presence. The memory of their ruthless efficiency was a cold knot in his stomach. They were shadows, striking with precision, and they would not have given up the chase so easily. Jack knew they were likely still out there, circling like vultures, waiting for their moment. His mind replayed Brody's words, a broken record in his head. Protect her, Jack, the giantess. The very idea had seemed like a fever dream, the ramblings of a dying man. Now, with the weight of that promise pressing down and the tangible threat of Blackwood's killers closing in, the surreal quality of the task only deepened. He had spent 8 years trying to escape the madness of his past, the haunting images of his family's final moments. But this new reality was pulling him back into a chaos he never imagined. He felt like a marionette, dancing to the string of a dead friend's last wish, completely unprepared for the bizarre performance that awaited him. The trail opened into a wide, fertile valley, an unexpected splash of green in the otherwise rugged landscape. Fields stretched out on either side, golden wheat swaying gently in the breeze, interspersed with patches of darker, richer soil. In the distance, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills and a dense, dark forest, stood the Vance homestead. It looked unassuming from this far, a collection of sturdy wooden buildings, a main house, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, all weathered by years of sun and wind. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a domestic sight that felt utterly out of place amidst the danger. Jack reined in his horse, a quiet, dusty presence beneath him. He dismounted, careful to stay hidden behind a cluster of gnarled oaks at the edge of the valley. His hand instinctively went to the familiar grip of his revolver, the cold steel a reassuring weight against his palm. He pulled out his field glasses, the lenses blurring slightly with the dust that coated everything. He swept the area slowly, methodically, his gaze lingering on every shadow, every movement. No signs of Blackwood's men yet, but that meant nothing. They were cunning, patient predators. He studied the homestead itself. Fences, sturdy but not fortified, marked the perimeter. A well-used path led from the main house to the barn, a few chickens scratched in the dirt near a coop. Life here seemed to continue, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. This peaceful scene felt like a fragile illusion, ready to shatter at any moment. He could almost hear the distant clatter of a bucket, the lowing of cattle, sounds of honest toil that amplified the sense of impending tragedy. The quiet hum of the valley was broken only by the wind rustling through the wheat and the anxious beat of his own heart. He shifted his weight, his eyes continuing their careful sweep. And then he saw her. At first, she was just a distant figure in the fields beyond the barn, moving with a rhythm that seemed too deliberate, too powerful for a solitary farmer. He lowered the field glasses, blinked, and then raised them again, focusing with a sudden, desperate intensity. The world through the lenses sharpened, and his breath hitched in his throat. It was her. It had to be. The woman was working a patch of land, perhaps clearing stones or tilling the earth, her back to him. But even from this distance, through the magnifying power of the glass, her scale was undeniable. She was immense, a towering presence that dwarfed the plow she leaned against, making the sturdy farm implement look like a child's toy. The very ground seemed to recede around her, accentuating her colossal form. Jack had seen large men in his life, giants of the plains, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for this. A tremor went through him, a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock that bypassed his exhaustion and his pain. Brody's words, once cryptic and almost comical, now crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. A giantess. He had imagined a tall woman, perhaps 6 feet or even a little more, an imposing figure certainly, but one still within the realm of human expectation. This woman was a force of nature, a living monument, a creature from legend suddenly manifest in the mundane reality of a sun-drenched field. He lowered the field glasses again, his hand shaking slightly. He needed to see it with his own eyes, unmagnified, to truly believe it. He squinted, the figure still visible, still impossibly tall, a dark silhouette against the bright field. The sense of unreality was overwhelming. This was not just a tall woman. This was something entirely different, something that defied the natural order he had always known. His mind struggled to process the visual information, trying to reconcile it with everything he understood about the world. It was like seeing a mountain suddenly walk, or a tree decide to take flight. He raised the field glasses once more, compelled by a morbid fascination. She moved with a surprising grace for her size, each movement fluid and powerful. Her long auburn hair, braided down her back, swung gently with her motions. Her frame was not merely large, but muscular, strong, suggesting years of physical labor. She wore simple, practical clothing, a plain dress of some dark fabric, sturdy boots on her feet. Even the boots looked enormous, like miniature boats. The sunlight caught the gleam of sweat on her arms as she worked, a testament to her exertion. Jack felt a laugh bubble up, dry and humorless, catching in his throat. This was the woman he was supposed to protect? This was the vulnerable person Brody had entrusted to him? The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. How could he protect someone who could probably snap him in half with a single hand? His skills, his instincts, his training, all felt utterly inadequate in the face of this unbelievable reality. He was a detective, a man who dealt in shadows and whispers, in the delicate balance of evidence and deduction. This situation was screaming, impossible, and utterly baffling. His own problems, the deep, gnawing grief that had consumed him for 8 years, felt suddenly small, almost trivial in the face of this new, gigantic problem. He had come here drawn by a deathbed promise, seeking some kind of redemption, some way to quiet the ghost that haunted him. Instead, he had found himself face to face with a living enigma, a challenge that seemed designed to mock his very existence. He felt a profound weariness settle over him, deeper than any physical fatigue. The world, it seemed, was determined to throw him curveballs he couldn't even comprehend, much less catch. He thought of Brody, his kind, steadfast friend. Had Brody known? Had he truly understood the immense, literal scale of the woman he was asking Jack to protect? Or was Brody, in his final moments, just clinging to a desperate hope, sending Jack on a fool's errand that would lead to certain disaster? A bitter taste filled Jack's mouth. This wasn't just dangerous, it was insane. He watched her for a long time, trying to make sense of the sight. The farm animals, cows and horses in a distant pasture, looked like toys beside her, their scale distorted by her presence. A small dog, no bigger than his fist, trotted obediently at her heels, a comical companion to such a monumental figure. She stooped, her entire body bending, to pick something from the ground, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He could hear the faint sounds of her work now, the rhythmic thud of a tool hitting the earth, a soft exhalation of effort. Every sound was deeper, more resonant, carrying further across the fields. His mind raced, grappling with the practicalities. How did she fit in a normal house? What kind of horse could carry her? How could they hide her from Blackwood's men, who were clearly tracking her down for some dangerous secret? She was a beacon, a landmark, impossible to conceal. The thought was both terrifying and darkly amusing. He felt a desperate urge to run, to turn his horse, and flee back to the solitude of his mountain, where the only giants were the silent peaks. But Brody's badge, tucked into his pocket, felt heavy, a constant reminder of his oath. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. His eyes narrowed, observing her carefully. She worked with an intense focus, her movements precise despite their power. There was a dignity in her labor, a quiet strength that emanated from her even at this distance. She was not just big, she was purposeful, formidable. He could see the lean muscle beneath her clothing, the effortless way she handled tools that would strain an ordinary man. His detective's mind, despite the shock, began to churn. Her size was a weakness for concealment, yes, but it was also an undeniable strength. Could she defend herself? Could she defend him? The thought was jarring, turning the conventional roles of protector and protected on their head. He, the hardened, world-weary detective, was supposed to shield this colossal woman from danger. The irony was almost unbearable. He had faced down outlaws, murderers, and corrupt officials, but never before had his assignment been so profoundly, physically overwhelming. A cloud passed overhead, casting a momentary shadow across the valley. It moved quickly, and then the sun was back, brighter than before. He realized he had been holding his breath. The silence of his observation was broken only by the distant sounds of the farm and the whisper of the wind. He was acutely aware of his own smallness, hidden amongst the trees, a tiny speck observing a magnificent, improbable landscape. He had expected danger, deceit, and perhaps even a femme fatale. He had steeled himself for a return to the brutal realities of the world he had abandoned. But he had not expected this. This was not the world he knew, not the world he had ever imagined. It was a world turned upside down, a challenge that went beyond the physical, beyond the tactical, straight into the realm of the unbelievable. He tightened his grip on the field glasses, his knuckles white. The ache in his side flared, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of his own vulnerability. He was tired, wounded, and staring at a woman who could probably uproot one of these ancient oaks with her bare hands. The weight of his promise and the sheer audacity of Brody's dying request pressed down on him with crushing force. He felt a profound sense of isolation, alone in this valley, facing a task that felt utterly impossible. Just then, as if sensing his prolonged scrutiny, the giantess paused her work. Slowly, deliberately, she straightened up, her immense form rising against the golden wheat fields. Jack watched, mesmerized, as she turned her head. Her gaze, even from this considerable distance, felt piercing, as if she could see right through the dense foliage that concealed him. Her long shadow, stretched by the late afternoon sun, reached out across the field, growing longer and longer until it seemed to engulf the very spot where he stood. And then her eyes, striking green even from this distance, found his. Jack stood frozen, the field glasses still pressed to his eyes, his breath caught in his chest. His mind went blank, utterly devoid of thought, leaving him momentarily speechless and utterly bewildered. The shadow of Sarah Vance stretched before Jack. He froze, the setting sun painting the valley in orange and purple. Her green eyes, sharp and unwavering, held a deep wariness. They assessed him with an intensity he had not seen in years. The dusty path felt gritty under his boots. A faint scent of drying hay drifted on the breeze. A distant crow called, echoing the uneasy silence between them. He took a slow breath, pushing down the shock. Brody's words, "Protect the giantess," seemed absurd. This woman showed quiet strength, a power that made his weary frame feel small. He reached for the tarnished silver badge inside his duster. It offered some grounding. "Sarah Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped closer, hands held openly. "My name is Jack Ryder." Her gaze did not soften. An unreadable flicker crossed her face, quickly masked. Her lips pressed to a thin line. She watched him, shoulders broad, posture unyielding. The air felt heavy with unspoken suspicion. "I was sent by Thomas Brody," Jack continued, hoping for trust. A slight tremor ran through her hands, then vanished. A new silence settled, deeper than before. Only the wind whispered through the tall grass. "Brody is dead," she stated. Her voice was deep, resonant, a flat, undeniable fact. There was no grief, only detached observation that chilled him. "He was murdered," Jack confirmed. His eyes scanned her face for reaction. "In Harmony Creek, about a week ago." Her jaw tightened. "What does that have to do with you on my farm, Mr. Ryder?" The question was direct, a challenge. Her green eyes narrowed slightly, betraying intelligence. He understood her caution. He pulled Brody's badge from his coat, holding it for her to see. It glimmered in the fading light. "Brody and I were old friends. He sent me here. He knew he was in danger. He left a message." Sarah's gaze flickered to the badge, then back to him. Recognition flashed, then greater skepticism. A message? What kind of message would a dead man leave for a stranger to deliver? Her voice was low and sarcastic. He felt sweat trickle down his temple. The air cooled as the sun dipped. "He said you were in danger," Jack explained, keeping the badge visible. "He said you had something important, something others wanted, something dangerous." He watched her. Her posture stiffened, her mouth tightened. He had hit a nerve. "Everyone wants something," she replied, her voice edged with weariness. "And everyone thinks they know danger. My life is my own business, Mr. Ryder. I need no man to tell me about danger." Frustration hit Jack. He had expected wariness, not this wall of defiance. Brody's desperate plea, the weight of his promise, echoed. "Brody was a good man. He trusted me. He wanted you safe." His words felt small against her presence. She let out a soft sigh. "You believe him? Your dead friend? His ghost stories?" Her tone mocked, yet a tremor hinted at vulnerability. "I believe his dying words," Jack countered, his voice firming. "I saw him. He was worried, Sarah. Worried for you." He gestured to the isolated farmhouse. "Someone is hunting you. They killed Brody to get to you." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "No one killed Brody for me. Brody was a sheriff. He had enemies. His death has nothing to do with this farm or with Metu. Her voice rose, taking on a sharper edge. They tracked me from Harmony Creek, Jack revealed. Brody's killers ambushed me. They carried maps of this place. He paused. They are coming for you, Sarah. They will stop at nothing. Stillness settled upon Sarah. Her gaze swept the fields towards the distant trees. A flicker of fear crossed her eyes, then hardened into resolve. The wind rustled dry leaves. He could still smell the tilled soil. You expect me to believe you? She asked, her eyes cold. A stranger claiming to be sent by a dead man, speaking of assassins and maps. What proof do you have, Mr. Ryder, beyond your word and that badge? Proof? Jack scoffed, a dry laugh escaping. I have a bullet graze on my arm, courtesy of the men who killed Brody and want to find you. He nodded towards his duster. They are not playing games, Sarah. They will burn this place to get what they want. She took a step back. Her large, calloused hands tightened into fists. Deep lines of worry etched around her eyes, signs of years of solitude. He struggled to reconcile this formidable woman with Brody's image of vulnerability. How could he protect someone so capable? Yet the danger was real. I do not need your protection, Mr. Ryder, she stated. Her voice returned to its deep calm with an underlying steel. I have lived alone here for years. I have faced every threat on my own terms. I will continue to do so. The words were a final dismissal. Jack felt the weight of his task. Brody's concerned face flashed in his mind. He could not leave. Brody would not have sent me if he did not think you needed help. This is not just about living alone. This is about men who kill without hesitation. He infused urgency into his voice. The badge in his hand reminded him of his oath. Then you should leave, she retorted, her green eyes piercing him. If these men are as dangerous as you say, you have no business here. This is my home, my life. I will not have it complicated by strangers and their bloody promises. She turned, a decisive movement. She walked toward the farmhouse door. Her boots on the dry earth were soft, yet held finality. They will come for you, Jack called out, sharp with frustration. The words echoed in the vast space. The cold air bit his hands. They will find this farm. They will find you. Sarah paused at the threshold, hand on the doorframe. She did not turn. Then I will be ready, she said, her voice low and steady. Now, Mr. Ryder, ride out before darkness settles. I have no room for strays, no patience for desperate men with sad stories. The door creaked, then closed with a soft thud. Jack stood alone in the fading light. The cool evening air carried the sharp smell of pine. Silence returned, heavy, broken only by crickets. He stared at the closed door, mind reeling. He had faced an ambush, only to be dismissed by the one he swore to protect. The impossible task had just become even more impossible. He felt utterly frustrated, a lone figure on an isolated farm, with a woman who wanted nothing to do with his help. The sun bled crimson across the western sky, painting the Vance homestead in hues of bruised purple and dying orange. Jack stood near the barn, the silence thick and heavy between him and Sarah. Her earlier dismissal still echoed in his mind, a cold barrier despite the fading warmth of the day. He watched her retreat toward the house, her colossal frame silhouetted against the fleeting light, her shoulders stiff with stubborn pride. A gust of wind whipped dust around him, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant pines. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, the phantom pain of past failures. Brody's words, a solemn promise, tethered him here, a reluctant guardian to a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. Suddenly, a sound tore through the quiet evening, not the familiar lowing of cattle or the chirp of crickets. It was a rhythmic thud, growing rapidly, the unmistakable beat of multiple horse at a gallop. Jack's head snapped up, his senses instantly on high alert. The hairs on his neck prickled. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, making it difficult to discern figures. But the intent behind the sound was clear. Danger. His hand instinctively went to the worn grip of his revolver, its familiar weight a cold comfort. He had heard that sound 8 years ago, just before his world shattered into a million pieces. "Sarah!" he roared, his voice raw, cutting through the dusk. He started running towards the house, his lean body moving with a sudden, desperate urgency. Blackwood's men. They were here. Their presence felt like a physical blow, a confirmation of the relentless evil he had glimpsed on the trail. He had not truly believed they would strike so soon, so boldly, in the fading light. A wave of fury, cold and sharp, washed over him. He hated himself for the momentary lapse, for letting his guard down even for a second after her rejection. Sarah emerged from the doorway, her green eyes wide with alarm, drawn by the thunder of hooves and Jack's sudden shout. She saw them then, a dozen dark figures, riding hard over the rise, their faces obscured by the dim light, but their purpose stark and brutal. Her breath hitched in her throat, a cold dread seizing her. This was the threat her father had warned her about, the one she had tried to ignore. She had believed her isolation was her shield, her towering presence a deterrent. Now that shield felt like a flimsy paper screen. "Get inside," Jack yelled, skidding to a halt near the porch. He pushed her towards the door, his movements fluid and urgent. Barricaded. He knew he could not outrun them, nor could she. The house, however old, offered some protection. He took cover behind a thick support beam of the porch, drawing both his revolvers. The metallic click of the hammers being pulled back sounded deafening in the charged air. He heard the first bullet whistle past, splintering the wood just inches from his head. They were not here to parley. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming to protect her home, her legacy. But Jack's command, sharp and resolute, cut through her fear. She pushed the heavy wooden door shut, the latch groaning as it caught. She moved furniture against it, a large chest, then a heavy table, her immense strength proving invaluable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could hear the shouts now, coarse and guttural, closer than she had ever imagined. The stench of horse and gunpowder was already in the air. Jack returned fire, aiming for the riders' horses, hoping to dismount them and slow their advance. One animal shrieked, collapsing in a heap, throwing its rider to the dusty ground. Another bullet struck the porch post, sending splinters flying. He moved with the grace of a seasoned hunter, constantly shifting, making himself a difficult target. 8 years of isolation had not dulled his instincts, only sharpened them. The raw, primal urge to survive, to protect, surged through him, rekindling a fire he thought had long been extinguished. This was not about Brody anymore. This was about the living, breathing woman behind the barricaded door. The attackers dismounted, surrounding the house, fanning out like a pack of hungry wolves. Their leader, a gaunt man with a scar on his cheek, barked orders. Silas Blackwood. Jack recognized the cold, predatory gleam in his eyes from his brief encounter on the trail. He knew this man represented a deep, sinister force. Blackwood's men began to systematically break down the windows, their axes and rifle butts smashing glass and wood. The sound was deafening, a symphony of destruction. Sarah, inside, cried out as a window shattered in the kitchen. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace. She would not let them desecrate her home, her father's memory. Her knuckles turned white around the cold metal. Fear still gnawed at her, but a stubborn resolve hardened her features. She heard the distinct cracks of Jack's revolvers, the desperate fight he waged alone. The house shook with the impact of bodies trying to force entry. "They're trying to flank the house," Jack yelled, his voice strained above the din. He fired 2 more shots, dropping a man trying to slip around the side. He needed Sarah. He needed her height, her strength. He needed her to understand the gravity of the situation. "Sarah, I need you to fight." A moment of hesitation, then a roar of defiance tore from Sarah's throat. She moved from the barricaded front door, iron poker in hand. She saw a man attempting to climb through a broken window in the living room. Without a second thought, she swung the poker, a powerful sweeping arc. The impact was sickeningly dull, and the man crumpled, falling backward out of the window. A grim satisfaction, mixed with profound terror, washed over her. She had never struck another human being in anger, let alone in defense of her life. "Good," Jack shouted, a flicker of approval in his sharp gray eyes. He had not expected such raw force, such immediate action. He had seen the fear in her, but he also recognized the steel that lay beneath. "Keep them off the windows. I'll handle the front." Their combined efforts, though uncoordinated, proved surprisingly effective. Jack, with his precision aim and tactical movement, kept the main assault at bay. Sarah, moving like a colossus through her own home, became a living battering ram, denying entry through any shattered opening. Her immense reach and powerful swings sent men scrambling, dislodged, or simply unconscious. She moved from window to window, poker blurring, a terrifying, formidable silhouette against the flickering lamplight inside. The air grew thick with gunpowder smoke, dust, and the acrid smell of burning wood as a lantern was thrown against the side of the house. Flames began to lick at the dry timber. Jack swore under his breath. They were trying to smoke them out. He knew their position was becoming untenable. He fired, dropping another assailant, then another, his movements a blur of practiced efficiency. He needed an opening, a moment to think, to plan their next move. Sarah, engaged in a brutal struggle at a side window, screamed. A rifle butt, swung with desperate force, caught her shoulder, sending a searing pain through her. Her grip on the poker faltered for a second. The world spun. She felt a sharp, ripping sensation. Then a burning wetness spread across her side. A bullet, fired from below, had found its mark. It was not a fatal wound, but it tore through flesh, lodging itself painfully. She gasped, staggering back, one hand clutching the wound. The poker clattered to the floor, her vision blurred, tears of pain and shock springing to her eyes. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain was immense, a hot, throbbing agony that threatened to overwhelm her. The attackers, emboldened by her momentary collapse, pressed their advantage. One man began to scramble through the broken window frame, his eyes alight with malicious intent. Jack saw her fall, heard her cry of pain. A cold fear gripped his heart. He couldn't let her go down. He spun, firing two quick shots that dropped the assailant trying to enter through Sarah's window. He knew he was exposed, but he didn't care. His eyes locked onto her, seeing the terror and agony etched on her face. He had failed to protect his family. He would not fail Brody's trust, not again. He would not fail Sarah. "Sarah, are you hit?" he yelled, moving swiftly towards her, still firing over his shoulder at the remaining attackers at the front door. She nodded weakly, clutching her side, her face pale beneath the grime and sweat. Her eyes, usually so defiant, were now clouded with pain and a deep, raw vulnerability. The sensation of warm blood seeping between her fingers was terrifying. This was real. This was death knocking at her door. In her agony, her thoughts raced, frantic and desperate. She had to protect it. She had to. Her father's words, a desperate plea for her to keep the documents safe, echoed in her mind. With a grunt of pain, she pushed herself upright, her colossal frame swaying. Her eyes darted towards the old stone fireplace, its mantelpiece scarred with age. There was a loose stone, hidden for generations. Her father had showed it to her when she was a child. Her trembling fingers fumbled at the rough mortar, her pain sharpening her focus. She had to act. Now. She pulled at the stone, a frantic, almost animalistic effort. It grated, then slowly, agonizingly, loosened. Behind it, a small, dark cavity was revealed. Reaching deep within, her fingers brushed against a familiar, solid object, a thick, leather-bound folder. Her father's legacy, the very thing that had brought this nightmare to her doorstep. This was her deepest, most dangerous secret. Jack reached her side, his eyes scanning her wound, assessing the damage. "It's a through and through, but deep," he muttered, his voice gruff but laced with concern. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt, pressing it against her side. "Hold this tight." He looked at the hidden compartment, then at the folder in her hand, his sharp gaze instantly understanding. This was it, the dangerous secret. The last of Blackwood's men, a burly figure with a shotgun, tried one last desperate charge through the front door, which was now barely hanging on its hinges. Jack, his resolve hardened, spun and fired. The man stumbled, then fell heavily, his shotgun clattering on the wooden floor. The silence that followed was abrupt and absolute, broken only by the crackling of the small fire on the house's exterior and Sarah's ragged breathing. The attack had been brutal, swift, and utterly devastating. The homestead was scarred, windows shattered, wood splintered, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Sarah, clutching the thick, leather-bound folder to her chest as if it were her only lifeline, looked at Jack. Her colossal body trembled, her green eyes wide, reflecting a mix of profound fear and a dawning, desperate trust. The secret was out, revealed in a moment of pain and raw survival. She could no longer hide. The thick, leather-bound folder felt heavy in Sarah's hands, its worn edges catching the lamplight. Her eyes, still wide with the shock of the attack, met Jack's across the dim, quiet room. The last of Blackwood's men lay still outside, their violence replaced by an unsettling silence. The scent of gunpowder still clung faintly to the air, mixing with the sharp smell of lamp oil and the underlying aroma of dried herbs from Sarah's kitchen. She took a slow, deep breath, her immense chest rising and falling. "These are what they want," Sarah said, her voice a low rumble, devoid of its earlier defiance. She extended the folder toward him, her large fingers trembling slightly. The leather cover felt smooth beneath Jack's fingertips as he took it, its surface cool from the evening air. He felt the weight of it, the true burden of what it contained, settle in his palms. This was not just a collection of papers. It was a testament to someone's life, a dangerous inheritance, and the reason for the night's bloodshed. Jack nodded, his gaze sweeping over her face. He saw the fatigue etched around her striking green eyes, the faint bruise forming along her jawline from where she had taken a glancing blow. He could feel the pulse thrumming in his own temples, a dull ache from the fight. "Let's see what's inside," he replied, his voice rough. He found a small, sturdy wooden table in the main room, clearing aside a few forgotten sewing notions. The flickering flame of the oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows, making the familiar objects of the room seem alien. Dust motes danced in the light, a silent ballet in the stillness. He opened the folder carefully, the brittle parchment rustling like dry leaves. The first page was a faded map, its ink lines tracing out vast tracts of land, rivers, and small settlements. He spread it out, the lamplight barely adequate to illuminate its full scope. His keen gray eyes, accustomed to poring over minute details, immediately began to scan the intricate markings. He could feel Sarah's watchful presence behind him, silent, unmoving, a colossal shadow in the room. The map itself was old, perhaps decades, but annotated with newer, bolder marks, crosses, and handwritten notes in a forceful looping script. Jack recognized it as a land dispute map, but on a scale far grander than any he had ever encountered. Acres and acres, not just individual plots, were outlined, many with conflicting claims and boundaries. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the unsaid, the unspoken fears. He picked up the first sheaf of papers. They were official-looking documents, land grants, title deeds, and legal notices, many bearing seals of towns long forgotten or absorbed into larger counties. Jack shifted his weight, the old wooden floorboards groaning softly beneath his boots. The smell of aged paper, a mix of dust and dry ink, filled his nostrils. He began to separate them, arranging them into small piles. "My father collected these," Sarah said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. "He said they told a story no one wanted to hear." Jack grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes still fixed on the documents. "Looks like a long story," he muttered. He pulled a small, worn magnifying glass from his duster pocket, a tool he hadn't used in years. His detective's instinct, dulled by time and grief, was stirring, slowly coming back to life. He felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the intellectual challenge, even as a cold fear gripped his stomach. He found ledgers next, thick books filled with columns of figures, transactions, and dates. They detailed massive land acquisitions, often at suspiciously low prices, from struggling homesteaders and small-time ranchers. The names of buyers were frequently obscured or routed through shell corporations. Jack felt the faint stubble on his chin, a rough reminder of the day's events. His mind raced, connecting the dots, piecing together the fragments of a dark mosaic. "These people," Jack said, tapping a finger on a particularly damning entry, "they weren't just buying land, they were swallowing it whole." He looked up at Sarah, his eyes grim. "Systematically, and they were ruthless about it." Sarah stepped closer, her shadow falling over the table. She peered down at the papers, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "My father said they were like locusts," she whispered, her voice laced with bitterness. "They came, they devoured, and they moved on." She folded her arms, her knuckles white. He tried to stop them. He spent years gathering this evidence. Jack returned his attention to the documents, his fingers sifting through them. He saw how the same few names recurred, subtly disguised through various aliases and holding companies. These were not local disputes. This was a coordinated effort, reaching across county lines, perhaps even state borders. The scale of the ambition was chilling. The plan was clear: displace the small landholders, consolidate power, and control vital resources. He felt the rough grain of the table beneath his hands, anchoring him to the present, even as his mind dove into the past. Corrupt officials, Jack murmured, almost to himself, pointing to several documents signed by long-dead magistrates and sheriffs. They had help on the inside. He paused, squinting at a faded signature. And on the outside, too, by the looks of it. The implication was clear. The conspiracy was deeply entrenched, reaching into every layer of society. It was not just about money, it was about absolute control. He pressed his lips into a thin line, a knot tightening in his chest. He continued to work through the night, the silence of the farmhouse broken only by the rustle of papers and the occasional sigh from Sarah, who sat patiently across from him, her gaze fixed on his intense face. The oil in the lamp began to run low, its flame flickering more aggressively, casting exaggerated shadows. Jack's eyes burned with fatigue, but he pushed on, driven by a growing sense of urgency. Each document he uncovered, each name he deciphered, added another piece to the grim puzzle. Then, tucked away amidst a stack of old mining claims, he found it. A list of shareholders for a holding company, a complex web of investments designed to obscure ownership. His gaze skimmed over the unfamiliar names, the small print blurring slightly from the strain. Then one name, etched in a precise, almost elegant script, caught his attention. It was not prominent, just another name in a long list, but it hit him like a physical blow. Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat. The magnifying glass slipped from his fingers, clattering softly onto the table. He stared at the name, a cold, hard knot forming in his stomach. The world seemed to shrink around him, the flickering lamplight suddenly too dim, the air too thin. He felt a sudden sharp pain behind his eyes. It was a name he had not seen in 8 years, a name he had tried desperately to forget. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed, sensing the sudden shift in his demeanor. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her concern radiating towards him. Jack didn't answer immediately. His mind reeled, tumbling backward through time, to a place he never wanted to revisit. The name. It was connected to the official inquiry into his family's murder. A minor figure, a lawyer who had supposedly handled some peripheral details, a man who had offered his condolences with a slick, insincere smile. He had dismissed him as insignificant then, just another face in the blur of his grief. But the name was here, in Sarah Vance's family documents, tangled in a conspiracy of land and power. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers finding purchase in the stiff strands. The blood in his veins felt like ice. "This name," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Rough with disbelief, he pointed a trembling finger at the elegant script. "Eleanor Finch. She was connected to the investigation into my family's deaths." Sarah gasped softly, her eyes widening. "Your family?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Jack slowly pushed himself back from the table, the wooden chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound was jarring in the profound silence. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a sickening realization blooming in his mind. He looked at Sarah, his gray eyes haunted, seeing her not just as a client, but as a potential mirror to his own tragedy. He could taste the metallic tang of fear, a familiar sensation he despised. "She was a solicitor," Jack continued, his voice tight, each word a struggle. "Hired by the county to oversee some of the paperwork after the incident. Or so I was told." He closed his eyes for a moment, pressing his thumb and forefinger against his temples. The memories, long suppressed, clawed their way to the surface with a vengeance. The smell of smoke, the sound of distant screams, the feel of cold steel in his hand. He opened his eyes, staring blankly at the map, then at the ledger, then back at Eleanor Finch's name. It was a ghost from his past, now manifesting in the present, interwoven with Sarah's desperate struggle. The coincidence was too jarring, too cruel to be just a coincidence. His detective's mind, now fully awakened, began to forge a terrifying connection. This conspiracy, Jack said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's not just about land, not just about money. He looked at Sarah, a cold, hard dread washing over him, chilling him to the bone. This is a deep rot, and it might be linked to the very tragedy that destroyed my own life 8 years ago. The thought, unspoken for so long, finally found its voice, hanging heavy in the air between them. A dark, inescapable truth. The cold dread coiled in Jack Ryder's gut. The words on the page blurred, then sharpened. His family's name, though not directly mentioned, appeared in the patterns of influence, the acquisitions. It all pointed to the same dark forces. 8 years he lived in torment, believing their deaths were random. Now the bitter truth tasted like ash. He looked at Sarah, sitting across the sturdy wooden table. Lamplight etched lines on her weary face. The thick leather folder lay open, its brittle pages revealing betrayal. Her green eyes, deep in knowing, mirrored his pain. She had carried this weight for years. It is not just land, Jack rasped, pushing a yellowed map across the table. It is power, a hunger consuming everything. The map showed vast territories crisscrossed with lines. This is no local dispute. It reaches far, beyond Harmony Creek, beyond this valley. Sarah leaned forward, her frame hunched, tears in her eyes. My father suspected this, she said, her voice trembling. He spent years piecing it together, calling it the serpent's grip. She traced a name on a document. Silas Blackwood, a name that repeatedly appeared. My father always feared him most. Jack's jaw tightened. Blackwood, the man whose agents ambushed him. The name connected directly to the pain still gnawing at him, a phantom ache in his chest. Laughter once filled his home. He never expected answers, only peace. Now the answers were here, devastating. My family, Jack began, words catching. He had not spoken of them in years. They were victims of a stagecoach robbery 8 years ago. They called it outlaws. He paused. But the route, the timing, it always felt wrong. Sarah's gaze softened, a flicker of empathy, a shared understanding. He took a ragged breath. These documents do not name my family's killers, but they expose the network, the pattern. They show how anyone standing in the way of land acquisitions or mining rights was systematically removed. He pointed to another section, a scheme of fraudulent deeds and forced relocations. The methods are strikingly similar. The efficiency, ruthless. Weariness settled over him. He carried the guilt of failing to protect his family. Now he found a different burden. Their deaths were not random violence, but a calculated move. This did not ease the pain, but focused his anger, giving it a target. Sarah reached out, her large hand covering his on the table. Her touch felt soft, a silent acknowledgement. You are not alone, she murmured, her voice filled with emotion. My father died because of these papers. They came for him as they came for your family, as they come for me. Her words cut through his isolation. He looked at her. Her size had initially been a barrier. Now he saw the woman beneath, burdened by truth, haunted by loss, fiercely protective. Her strength was her unwavering resolve to honor her father's fight. The scale of it, Jack said, pulling his hand away gently, needing to understand the map's true scope. It is not just one man. Blackwood is a piece, but he answers to others. Powerful interests. Men who make people disappear, who make accidents happen. He remembered Brody's urgent last words. Brody knew. They want these documents, Sarah confirmed, her voice firm, vulnerability replaced by steely determination. They cannot risk this information getting out. It would unravel everything. She clenched her fist. My father said it would expose a conspiracy reaching high offices, corrupt officials, land barons, railroad magnates. A shiver ran down Jack's spine. This was beyond one detective, beyond one man. He was one against an army of influence, faceless but with dark intent. Yet looking at Sarah, he felt a flicker of purpose. He was bound by Brody's promise, but now by a personal, shared fight against a devastating enemy. They will stop at nothing, Jack stated. scanning the windows, the dark beyond the lamplight. If they know you have these, they will burn this place down. He understood that ruthlessness, having seen it in those who valued power above all. His family's tragedy was proof. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze on the papers. I know, she said, barely audible. My father warned me. He made me memorize parts, just in case. She looked up, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. He said this truth was too important to die with him. The farmhouse air grew heavy with unspoken fears. They sat in silence, two solitary figures bound by tragedy and a dangerous secret, their shadows dancing. Jack almost tasted dust, heard imagined horses. He felt the familiar tension in his shoulders, the hunter's instinct reawakening, sharpened by exile and recent violence. He rose, his hand instinctively finding his revolver holster. We need a plan, he said, calm and pragmatic. They know you have these. They know I am here. They will not wait. He walked to the window, peering into the darkness, straining to see. The wind whispered through the tall grass, a mournful sound. Where would we go? Sarah asked, her voice filled with desperate resignation. This is all I have. This land, this house, my father's legacy. She gestured around the simple room, a testament to generations of resilience, her deep attachment palpable. Anywhere but here, once they know, Jack replied, his gaze on the darkness. They will not leave anything standing. Not if these documents are what I think. He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw. He had nothing to lose but his life, and a chance for justice for Brody and his family. Sarah had everything. Just then a blinding flash erupted in the distant night. It climbed rapidly, a streak of angry red, blossoming into a fiery bloom, painting the hills in an eerie, momentary glow. The harsh, acrid scent of gunpowder reached them on the wind. Jack swore. His mind instantly processed the implications. A signal flare. They were out there. They had found them. They know, Sarah breathed, a terrified gasp. She sprang up, her colossal height suddenly vulnerable. Her eyes were wide with primal fear. Their fragile bond solidified into a desperate alliance. Jack grabbed his rifle, checking the chamber. His heart hammered, not with fear, but cold adrenaline. 8 years of quiet dulled his senses, but the fight with Blackwood's men, the ambush, and now this, scraped away the rust. He was a detective again, a protector, facing a ghost from his past, in a present danger. He moved to another window, gauging direction. The flare was far but clear, signaling intent, a declaration of war, not stealth. Then he heard it, faint at first, a distant rumble against the night. A low thrumming vibrated through the earth. The sound grew inexorably into the rhythm of many hooves. It was the chilling sound of cavalry, bringing only destruction. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes darting between Jack and the growing sound. The hoofbeats were louder now, a thunderous drumbeat against the night. They were coming for her, for the documents. For them both. Jack turned, his gaze sharp. They are almost here, he said, low and urgent. We have to decide, Sarah, now. The choice hung heavy, a stark ultimatum. Fight overwhelming odds, or flee into the unknown, carrying the truth and facing endless pursuit. Hoofbeats thundered, shaking the Vance homestead. Jack shoved documents into Sarah's satchel, jaw tight. His eyes met hers. We move now, he growled. Sarah nodded, grim in pale moonlight. She gripped the satchel, her other hand on her father's rifle. Jack tasted metallic fear, anticipating the chase. They slipped out the back, dark silhouettes against the horizon. Farm sounds, usually comforting, mocked their abandoned life. A dog barked, then fell silent. Jack heard shouts, splintering wood as Blackwood's men breached the door. Panic clawed, but he pushed it down, focusing on the path. Sarah moved with surprising speed, her boots thudding softly. Jack ran beside her, his smaller frame contrasting her stride. Open fields offered little cover. Jack scanned the tree line and land contours for advantage. His mind raced, calculating routes, ambush points. Night air chilled his face, reminding him of vulnerability. Sarah's breathing was heavy but even, showing endurance. She followed, her auburn braid bouncing. Jack felt a flicker of shared purpose, a desperate partnership. They reached a dense pine forest, its shadows a welcome cloak. Jack motioned Sarah to follow, plunging into undergrowth. Twigs snapped, deafening in the quiet woods. He moved with hunter's stealth, aware of every rustle. Sarah struggled. Her size became a liability. Branches caught her, low limbs forced awkward ducks. She felt clumsy, an easy target. "Stay low," Jack whispered, guiding her around a thorny bush. Riders grew closer, horses snorting, voices clearer. They spread, encircling them. Sarah gritted her teeth, frustration warring with fear. She, accustomed to purpose, now felt cumbersome, betraying their position with every crunch. Despair washed over her, colder than night air. Jack stopped. Hoofbeats were directly behind them. He saw a lantern glinting through trees. "Quick," he muttered, pointing to a rocky outcrop. Behind that, Sarah tried squeezing into the narrow crevice, but her shoulders were too broad. She pressed against cold stone, holding her breath, documents clutched tight. Jack flattened beside her, barely fitting. He smelled horses and stale tobacco as riders passed, their voices low. A rider paused, his horse snorting beside their hiding spot. Jack's heart pounded, a frantic drum. He felt Sarah's warmth and rapid breathing, tasted adrenaline. He gripped his revolver, knuckles white. The rider lingered, then cursed, riding forward. They waited until sounds faded, the forest's silence thick and heavy. Sarah moved with new deliberation, her focus sharpened. She twisted, using powerful arms to push branches, clearing Jack's path. Her strength, once a burden, became an asset. Jack watched her, grudging respect building. She was strong and determined, a force. He ignored a pine needle sting, his gaze fixed on escape. They emerged into a moonlit canyon, walls rising steeply, casting long shadows. Air was cooler, drier, carrying ancient rock scent. Jack saw a distant campfire glint, confirming close pursuers. A grim satisfaction settled. They were still alive. He pointed to a narrow trail up the canyon wall. "Higher ground," he breathed, barely audible. The ascent was brutal. Loose scree shifted, threatening to send them tumbling. Jack moved with mountain goat agility, his gulch years serving him. Sarah found advantage in her long limbs and powerful grip, using immense hands on jagged rocks, pulling herself up. Jack watched her scale a treacherous section, determination etched on her face. Her size was a tool, honed by adapting. His muscles strained, lungs burned. His body, hardened by solitude, was not accustomed to this pace. He looked at the star-dotted sky, feeling insignificant. Yet beside him, Sarah climbed, defiant against the canyon's immensity. A shared glance passed, acknowledging danger in the strange trust binding them. They crested the canyon rim as dawn painted the eastern sky purple and gold. Below, the land stretched into a vast plain, dotted with brush and jagged peaks. Wind howled. Jack saw a dust plume, a dark cloud against the sun. Blackwood's men were still on their trail. No escape on the open plains. His heart sank. "They'll pick us off out there," Sarah said, her voice echoing the wind's lament. She pointed to rocky formations like ancient teeth. "We need cover." Jack nodded, his mind raced, calculating dwindling chances. Exhaustion gnawed. The sun rose higher, painting the plains in stark light. Every shadow seemed to betray them. They moved across the plains, keeping low, using every clump of sagebrush and land dip for concealment. Jack felt sun on his neck, dust gritty in his teeth. He felt exposed, a vulnerable target. Sarah, despite her size, showed discipline, her movements economical, her eyes scanning the horizon. She understood the deadly game. Documents in her satchel felt like a lead weight, their burden and reason to run. They narrowly avoided detection several times. A lone rider veered close, his horse snorting, eyes scanning. Jack and Sarah pressed into a shallow depression, holding breath, bodies aching. Jack felt dry earth against his cheek, smelled desert flowers. The rider passed, oblivious. They continued their flight. Each evasion was a small victory, merely delaying the inevitable. They reached rocky formations, a maze of wind-sculpted stone. It offered cover but also traps. Jack led, his instincts guiding him. He listened for echoes, dislodged stones, any sign of pursuers. Air within the formations was still and hot, contrasting the plains. He felt grit on his skin, his throat parched. Deeper into the formations, canyons grew narrower, walls rising higher. Sky reduced to a blue ribbon. Air grew still, heavy. Jack felt foreboding, a tightening in his gut. This felt like a trap, a funnel to a dead end. He turned a sharp corner, his heart plummeted. The canyon ended abruptly, plunging into a deep, jagged ravine. The chasm yawned, an impassable gap. No way around, no path down, only the sheer drop into the abyss. Cold dread washed over Jack, cornered. He looked back down the narrow canyon. Hoofbeats echoed, closing fast. They were trapped. He turned to Sarah, his eyes reflecting their stark reality. Her face was pale, green eyes wide with comprehension. Wind whistled from the ravine below. Jack knew, with chilling certainty, flight was over. Confrontation was inevitable. The wind howled a grim premonition, whipping dust into Jack's eyes as he stood on the ragged edge of the ravine. Behind them, the sheer drop disappeared into shadow, a final inescapable boundary. Ahead, Silas Blackwood and his remaining men advanced, their boots crunching on loose rock, their faces hard and determined. Jack tightened his grip on his revolver, its cold steel a familiar comfort in his palm. He saw the glint of metal in their hands, the cold, empty look in their eyes. There was no escape, only this desperate, final stand. Sarah stood beside him, a colossal silhouette against the darkening sky. Her breathing was heavy, but her stance remained resolute. He could feel her raw power, a silent hum of defiance in the air. She was a bulwark, a living wall, but even a wall could crumble under relentless pressure. Jack's mind raced, calculating angles, counting targets, the old instincts igniting like embers in a dying fire. He would not fail her. He could not. Brody's face flashed in his memory, a silent plea echoing in the wind. Not again. Blackwood's voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking. So the great detective returns, only to find himself cornered like a rat. His eyes, like chips of obsidian, flickered between Jack and Sarah. And his giantess, a magnificent prize. Too bad you won't live to enjoy it, Ryder. Jack offered no reply, conserving his breath, his focus razor sharp. He watched their movements, the way they spread out, trying to flank them. Sarah shifted her weight, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She picked up a large, jagged rock, hefting it easily in her massive hand. The stone looked like a child's toy in her grip. The first shot came from Blackwood's left flank, whistling past Jack's ear. He returned fire instantly, the roar of his revolver deafening in the sudden quiet. A man stumbled, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clattering to the ground. Sarah let out a primal yell, swinging the rock with devastating force. It connected with another attacker, sending him sprawling backwards, his helmet ringing against the unforgiving stone. Her strength was terrifying, an untamed force of nature. Jack reloaded with practiced ease, his movements fluid and precise. He moved like a shadow, ducking behind outcroppings, firing with deadly accuracy. He aimed for limbs, for anything that would slow them down, disrupt their formation. Each shot was a prayer, a desperate gamble against overwhelming odds. He felt the familiar weight of his past failures pressing down on him, urging him forward, demanding redemption. He would not let this end like the others. Blackwood, seeing his men falter, roared in order. "Forward, you fools! The giantess is ours!" He drew his own pistol, his aim surprisingly steady, and fired a shot that gouged a furrow in the rock beside Jack's head. Sarah was a whirlwind, her long arms sweeping, her heavy boots kicking up clouds of dust. Another man tried to rush her, a knife glinting in his hand. She met him with a powerful shove, sending him flying into the ravine's edge. He screamed as he tumbled into the void, his cry cut short by the immense depth. Jack saw her eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. She was fighting for her home, for her legacy, for the secrets her father entrusted to her. A sudden sharp pain flared in Jack's side as a bullet grazed his ribs. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the stinging sensation, and spun, firing blindly. He heard a yelp of pain, a satisfying confirmation that he had connected. He knew they couldn't hold out forever. Their ammunition was finite, their energy waning. He needed a plan, something more than just reactive defense. Blackwood, seeing an opening, lunged for Jack. He discarded his pistol, drawing a wicked-looking blade from his belt. His eyes were wild, a predator closing in for the kill. "You've caused me enough trouble, Ryder," he hissed, his voice laced with venom. Jack dropped his empty revolver, pulling out his second, smaller pistol, but Blackwood was too close. The blade flashed. Jack parried with his gun, the steel clashing with a metallic shriek. He felt the jarring impact travel up his arm, numbing his fingers. Blackwood was stronger than he looked, his movements surprisingly agile for a man of his build. This was not the polite, calculating villain he had imagined. This was a monster. They grappled, a desperate dance on the edge of the abyss. Blackwood's blows were brutal, aimed to incapacitate. Jack used his smaller frame, dodging and weaving, trying to find an opening. He remembered the pain of Brody's death, the agony of his family's murder. All that rage, all that sorrow, channeled into this desperate struggle. He fought not just for his life, but for every ghost that haunted him. As Jack struggled with Blackwood, another of Blackwood's men, a wiry, opportunistic fellow, circled wide. He raised a hunting rifle, not at Jack, but at Sarah. Jack saw it, a cold dread seizing his heart. "Sarah, look out!" he yelled, his voice strained with effort. But it was too late. The rifle cracked, loud and clear. Sarah cried out, a guttural sound of shock and immense pain. She staggered, her enormous frame swaying precariously. The bullet had struck her shoulder, blooming a dark stain on her custom-made shirt. She dropped the rock, her hand flying to the wound. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. She fell to one knee, her immense strength momentarily leaving her, her face contorted in agony. Jack felt a surge of pure, blinding fury. He twisted free from Blackwood's grasp, delivering a brutal headbutt that sent his adversary stumbling back, momentarily disoriented. He saw Sarah kneeling, her eyes wide with shock and pain. The leather-bound folder containing the precious Vance family documents slipped from her grasp. It tumbled to the ground, its brittle pages scattering across the dusty, rocky terrain like fallen leaves. Each document was a testament to her father's courage, a record of the treachery that now brought them to this precipice. Blackwood recovered, his face contorted in a sneer that stretched thin across his gaunt features. He saw Sarah's collapse, the scattered papers, the raw vulnerability laid bare. His eyes gleamed with triumphant malice. "It's over, Ryder," he spat, his voice thick with victory. He then made a sudden, unexpected movement. He reached into his coat and produced a small, nondescript device. He thumbed a switch. A low, rumbling groan emanated from the ground beneath their feet. The sound grew quickly, intensifying into a violent tremor. The earth began to shake, dust billowing upwards, rocks shifting with an ominous groan. Jack's eyes widened in horror. He understood. Blackwood had planted explosives. This wasn't just about killing them. It was about burying the evidence, burying the secret, burying them all. The ravine wall directly behind Jack and Sarah began to crack, thin fissures spreading like spider webs across the rock face. A monstrous chunk of the cliff, dislodged by the blast, began to slide. The sound was deafening, a roar of grinding stone and splintering earth. Jack instinctively lunged towards Sarah, his arm outstretched, a desperate attempt to shield her, to pull her away from the crumbling precipice. But the ground beneath him gave way. The force of the rock slide was immense, an unstoppable wave of destruction. Jack felt a terrible lurch as the earth beneath his feet disappeared. He screamed, not in pain, but in sheer primal terror as he lost his footing. He saw Sarah's face, her eyes wide with fear and helplessness, as the wall of tumbling rock and dust swept between them, tearing them apart. The last image he held was her hand, reaching out, before the crushing weight of the falling earth consumed his vision. He plunged into the gaping maw of the ravine, falling, utterly alone, into the cold, terrifying darkness below. The world was a maelstrom of dust and agony. Jack lay sprawled on jagged rocks, the impact having stolen his breath and scattered his thoughts. A dull, throbbing ache pulsed behind his eyes. He could taste grit and something metallic, unmistakably blood, coating his tongue. The air, thick with pulverized stone, burned in his lungs with every ragged inhale. He opened his eyes to a suffocating darkness, broken only by faint shafts of starlight filtering through the new, brutal ceiling of rock above him. His head swam with a dizzying current. He tried to move, a jolt of pain ripping through his left shoulder and down his side. A grunt escaped him, raw and involuntary. He was alive somehow, against all logic. But the question hammered at him, louder than the ringing in his ears. Where was Sarah? He pushed himself up, every muscle screaming in protest, his vision blurring, then clearing. The chasm was deeper than he had imagined, a broken landscape of fallen boulders and shattered earth. A cold dread, far more chilling than the night air, began to seep into his bones. He called her name, a desperate, hoarse whisper that seemed swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness. Sarah! His voice cracked, the sound weak and hollow. No answer came, only the faint whisper of the wind through the newly formed crevices. He scrambled, half crawling, half dragging himself over the debris, his hands raw against the sharp edges of rock. Each movement was a gamble, each breath a struggle. He searched for any sign, any sound. The thick leather folder containing the Vance family documents had been close to her when she fell. Had it been buried? Was she buried? A wave of nausea swept over him. The silence was absolute, terrifying. It told him everything he did not want to know. He remembered her falling, her face twisted in pain, the documents scattering like leaves in a storm. Then Blackwood's sneer, the flash, the earth ripping apart. He remembered the feeling of being torn from her, pulled into the abyss. He had promised Brody he would protect her. He had sworn to himself he would not fail again. This abyss was not just rock and dust. It was the gaping maw of his past, reaching out to claim another soul he cared for. A sob tore from his chest, raw and ragged, tasting of salt and despair. He slammed a fist against a rock, the sharp pain a fleeting distraction from the deeper agony within. 8 years ago, he had held his son's lifeless hand, his wife's eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. He had been too slow, too blind, too weak to protect them. Now, here in this cold, forgotten crevice, history was repeating itself. Sarah, that towering, formidable woman who had shown him a glimpse of warmth, a flicker of hope he thought long extinguished, was gone. The tears came then, hot and stinging, carving clean tracks through the grime on his face. They were not just for Sarah, but for all the ghosts he carried. For Brody, whose trust he had betrayed in his failure. For his family, whose memory still haunted his every waking moment. He had allowed himself to hope, to feel something akin to purpose again. And in return, the world had snatched it away, just as it always did. He sank to his knees, utterly defeated, the weight of his failures crushing him. He was a harbinger of doom, a magnet for tragedy. Everyone he tried to protect ended up broken or dead. A faint metallic glint caught his eye, barely visible in the gloom. He reached out, his fingers fumbling in the dust, and closed them around something cold and hard. It was the silver star, Brody's badge. It had somehow fallen from his pocket during the tumble, a silent, damning accusation. The worn edges of the metal pressed into his palm, a tangible link to a promise unfulfilled. He clutched it tight, feeling the ghost of Brody's kind, honest face looking at him, full of expectation. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears, the words tasting like ash. "I tried." But had he truly tried enough? Had he been fast enough? Smart enough? His detective's mind, even in its fog of pain, knew the answer. No. He stayed there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, the darkness mirroring the void in his soul. He wanted to give up, to let the dust bury him, to join the silent ranks of the Lambs. The idea was strangely comforting, an end to the endless cycle of pain. But then, a stubborn ember, deep within him, began to glow. It was a spark of defiance, a refusal to let the darkness win completely. He had failed, but he was not yet dead. And as long as he drew breath, there was a chance. He looked around the chasm again, his eyes now scanning for more than just Sarah's body. He looked for an exit, a way out of this tomb. The walls of the ravine were sheer, but in the distance, partially obscured by a fallen rock formation, he noticed a narrow fissure. It seemed impossibly small, a dark slit against the shadowed stone, but it offered the faintest suggestion of a path. He dragged himself toward it, his body moving on sheer willpower, a raw, primal urge to escape. Each step sent waves of agony through his injured side, but he ignored it. The badge was still clutched in his hand, a cold reminder of his duty. He reached the fissure, squeezing his battered frame through the tight opening. It was a crawl, a slow, arduous ascent through a natural tunnel, the air stale and heavy. He scraped his hands and knees on the rough rock, tasting copper and dirt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he emerged, blinking into the pale pre-dawn light. He stood on a high ledge, overlooking a vast, rolling landscape. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the clean air a stark contrast to the dust-filled depths he had just escaped. Then he saw it. In the distance, nestled amidst a cluster of rocky outcrops and sparse trees, stood a formidable structure. It was larger than any ranch house, more like a small fort, with stout wooden walls and what looked like a watchtower. A faint, flickering light emanated from within, a beacon in the fading darkness. Blackwood's stronghold. There was no mistaking it. A cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. If Sarah was alive, if she had been captured, that was where Blackwood would take her. And the documents. The thought of them in Blackwood's hands, the conspiracy going unchallenged, fueled a new searing heat in his blood. The grief, the despair, the failure, it all coalesced into a singular burning resolve. He wasn't going to lie down and die. Not yet. He looked at Brody's badge, then gripped it, his knuckles white. This wasn't just about Brody anymore, and it wasn't just about the documents. It was about Sarah. The memory of her fierce green eyes, her quiet strength, her unexpected vulnerability flashed in his mind. He had seen the terror in her eyes as the earth gave way, the flicker of trust she had given him. He felt a profound, almost desperate need to find her, to know if she was safe, to bring her back. He had to finish what they started. He began to move, his steps still stiff and painful, but now infused with a new grim purpose. He checked his revolver, the familiar weight a small comfort in his hand. 2 bullets. Only 2. His rifle was gone, lost somewhere in the chasm. His knife, thankfully, was still in its sheath. He was critically low on ammunition, bruised, battered, and alone. The odds were impossibly stacked against him. He was heading into a suicide mission. He knew it. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was madness, that he should turn back, that he should save himself. But the image of Sarah, wounded and falling, the documents scattering, kept playing in his mind. He pictured Blackwood's triumphant sneer, the cold cruelty in his eyes. He imagined the fate that awaited Sarah if he did nothing. He would not let her become another ghost in his life. He would not allow Blackwood to win. Jack Ryder, the broken detective, felt a flicker of his old self, the man who hunted justice, the man who never gave up, no matter the cost. His eyes, once clouded with grief, now burned with a fierce, unwavering determination. He pulled out the last 2 cartridges from his belt, each one feeling impossibly heavy, and loaded them into his revolver's cylinder. The clicks were sharp and final in the silent, cold air. The thought of Sarah and the vital documents propelled him forward, one agonizing step at a time. Jack's breath plumed white in the frigid air as he scanned the moonless peaks. The stronghold loomed before him, a dark scar against the bruised sky. He gripped his last bullets, each a reminder of the desperate odds. A familiar ache twisted in his gut, the helplessness from 8 years ago. This time, Sarah was out there. He would not fail again. Her strength, her defiance, solidified his resolve. He moved like a shadow clinging to the deepest night. The faint scent of coal smoke reached him. He reached the perimeter, eyes tracing every shadow for weakness. Old habits resurfaced, sharp and intuitive. He noted patrol routes, loose planks, a discarded bottle. He slipped past a sleeping guard, silent as falling snow. Each step beat against his ribs, a frantic rhythm. Sarah's face, etched with pain, drove him through the maze of shacks and tents. The air hung heavy with unwashed men and stale tobacco. Crude gallows in the central yard reminded him of Blackwood's cruelty. Anger washed over him. Brody's plea for justice echoed. There was no turning back. He found the main building, its windows dark. A single lamp burned inside. He tested a back door, barred as expected. Moving to a window, he pried its rusted latch with his knife. The wood groaned softly, making his heart leap. He eased inside, floorboards creaking. He was in, the air thick with dust. A low groan led him down a narrow corridor. The air grew colder, damp with earth. He found her in a stone cellar, chained to a post, her immense body slumped. Sarah was pale, hair matted, but her green eyes still held defiance. A gash marred her forehead. Her breathing was shallow. "Sarah," he whispered, relief and anger warring. Her eyes fluttered open. Recognition dawned, then desperate hope. "Jack," she rasped, "you came." He knelt, fumbling the rusty lock. The metal resisted. He pulled out his last lock-picking tool. His hands shook, but his focus was absolute. "Brody sent me," he said, the lie tasting bitter, "and I don't break promises." Heavy footsteps sounded overhead, drawing closer. Urgency clawed at his chest. The lock clicked. He helped her to her feet. She swayed, legs weak. "The documents," she whispered, fear in her eyes. "Blackwood has them." He was gloating. Jack's jaw tightened. "I know. We're getting them back. We're ending this." A quiet understanding passed between them. She leaned against him, her trust a precious weight. He led her towards Blackwood's voice, now a snarl from the room above. They reached a heavy oak door. Jack pushed it open enough to peer inside. Silas Blackwood stood at a desk, the Vance family documents spread before him, a smug smirk. Two men guarded him, rifles leaning. The room was thick with cigar smoke. Jack pushed Sarah behind him, gripping his revolver. "Blackwood," Jack's voice cut through the stillness. Silas whirled, eyes widening then narrowing with fury. "Ryder," he hissed, "I thought you were dead. A nuisance removed." The guards raised rifles. Jack was faster. 2 shots cracked, deafening. The men dropped. Sarah, despite weakness, grabbed a fallen rifle. Blackwood, roaring, lunged with a hidden dagger. Jack sidestepped. The fight was brutal. Blackwood was quick, fueled by rage. He tried to disarm Jack, landing a shallow cut on his arm. Jack pressed forward, focused on ending it. He remembered his lost family, Brody's trust. This was for all of it. Sarah swung the rifle, catching Blackwood across the side. He reeled, stunned. Jack seized the moment, slamming his fist into Blackwood's jaw with a force that echoed through the room. Blackwood collapsed, hitting the floor with a thud. He lay still, a crumpled heap. Jack stood over him, breathing heavily, revolver clutched. The room fell silent, save for their ragged breaths. Sarah moved slowly, her body aching, gathering the documents. She held the thick leather folder tightly. "It's over," she whispered, immense relief in her voice. Jack nodded, holstering his weapon. Weariness settled over him, but also a peace he hadn't known in years. He saw Sarah not just as a colossal woman, but a courageous soul. They secured the stronghold overnight. They found more evidence, connecting Blackwood to a vast network of corrupt officials. As dawn approached, they made their way to the nearest town. They sent a telegram with the Vance family documents to federal authorities. Justice had begun to turn. News spread. The evidence exposed corruption, reaching high into power. Powerful men crumbled. Fraudulent land deals were nullified. Stolen properties returned. Justice mended communities. For Jack, it brought satisfaction and melancholy. His family's destroyers were still beyond reach, but Brody's trust was honored. He found purpose beyond grief. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Sarah returned to her homestead, scarred but not broken. Jack stayed, helping her rebuild. He mended fences, repaired the barn, worked the neglected land. The quiet farm life soothed his soul. They talked for hours under the prairie sky, sharing past fears and dreams for a future they once thought impossible. Jack spoke of his lost family and crushing guilt. Sarah spoke of her isolation and fierce strength. Their pasts, once chains, now wove them together. There was no grand declaration, just a slow realization of profound kinship. One evening by the creek, Sarah turned to him. "What now, Jack?" she asked softly. Jack looked at the endless horizon. He thought of his lonely cabin, Brody's tarnished badge, in the lightness he now felt. "I don't know," he admitted, a rare smile touching his lips. "But I think we figure it out together. Whatever it is, we face it." Sarah clasped his hand, her fingers strong and warm. Her touch was a solid anchor. The world was vast, but the journey ahead would not be faced alone. In the ashes of their pasts, something resilient had begun to grow, a promise of a future forged in shared trust.